Greetings, dear colleagues. In this opportunity for the subject, the reading process in L2, we are going to talk about the developmental interdependence hypothesis. So, in order to understand interdependence hypothesis, it's important to understand what Cummings said in the year 2000 when he stated that academic proficiency transfers across languages. That means that students who have developed literacy in their first language will tend to make stronger progress in acquiring literacy in their second languages. Now, the main aspect of interdependence hypothesis, also referred to as the common underlying proficiency hypothesis, is to account for the fact that L1 language instruction appeared to support later L2 learning in studies done by Cummings in Canada and in the US in the year 1991. In short, these findings from these studies suggested that there is a common denominator in achieving proficiency regarding either language. This, applied to reading specifically, implies that reading is a shared ability, or arguably the same ability, thus implying that if a student achieves a level of proficiency in reading in L1, those skills will then transfer to L2 reading. Of course, this notion, this hypothesis, tends to be very controversial due to the fact that it presents as argument that language proficiency as opposed to L1 reading abilities is not critical to the development of L2 reading, meaning that perhaps if a learner or a student has some level of proficiency in L1, maybe they don't need to practice or they don't need to develop their L2 reading. This is quite controversial. This is quite interesting. However, Cummings, in a study done in the year 2000, he stated, or better clarified, that this notion of reading being transferred from L1 to L2 applies mostly in academic proficiency, in academic settings, meaning that the skills are transferred when it is used in school-related contexts, and more specifically, in specific processes. For example, a student that is proficient in L1 reading will still need to learn vocabulary and other important aspects regarding mechanics of the language. Now, several studies in the last 40 years have given a more sturdy base to this hypothesis, such as the studies done by Cummings in 1991, which we have already mentioned before, the one done by Verhoeven in the year 2000, and the one done by von Gelderen and his team in 2004. These studies carried out by these wonderful researchers were very well designed and very time consuming. That is very important to take into consideration. Most importantly, also the fact that these studies were presented in the form of longitudinal research within an adolescent population. And although they yielded very, very interesting results, well, too many variables would come into play, such as motivation. How motivated were these adolescents to practice, to learn L1 and L2? Also, aspects such as prior educational learning experiences, and this hasn't got to do only with language learning. It can also have to do with other aspects of learning. Not to mention the possible variation in academic skills that each student may have. This does not mean by any way, in any possible circumstance, that these studies are not important or that they were not conclusive enough. Actually, quite the opposite. They were able to prove that there is a very specific and very particular correlation in transference of skills from L1 to L2 in the realm of reading, more specifically, academic reading and all of the formal aspects of the language and all of the basic aspects of reading. Not exactly when it comes to other aspects, which is the other very important part of these studies, because the contribution is not necessarily what it can prove right, but also what it can prove wrong or what can actually take out of the equation. So, the important contribution from these studies is how there is an apparent confirmation that transfer of skills from L1 does not seem to occur for aspects such as vocabulary knowledge, listening comprehension, and orthographic script processing differences. So here we have something that is very important and very remarkable. There is a lesson to take from these kind of studies. Sometimes the researcher will go to try to prove something very specific, and the value of the research might actually be in what they prove that was not at the center, at the scope of the research. Nevertheless, these studies achieve both aspects. Like I said before, they do prove that there is a correlation between L1 to L2 transfer when it comes to reading skills, but it also specifically separates which aspects of reading it does transfer and which aspect it does not. Here are the references. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you have found this video educational and informative. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. So long and goodbye.